Chapter 1. The One Thing Nobody Else Said. My fist was pressed to black basalt, and the basalt was warm, which is the wrong word for stone that has never seen a sun, but that is the word my hand kept sending back. Warm. Alive. Watching. The voice came down through the dark like a bell struck inside a cathedral of black water. One syllable. It cost me a nosebleed and one of my eardrums, and I was already bleeding from the other. No. I looked up. He was taller than the bell. Coral had grown through the joints of his armor the way ivy grows through the bones of a fence, and where it grew it glowed. His trident was raised not to strike, to refuse. Refusal you can't bleed out. Behind me my Tide well ticker was cracked across its glass and stuttering. Green light in bars, 11%, 10, 11, 10. The wheel in my chest was still spinning, 1 rotation left. Maybe 2, if I lied to myself about the count, and I had already lied to myself about everything else, so I did not see why I should stop now. I could hear Pellwick breathing. That was the only reason I knew he was alive. Sion wasn't breathing loud enough to hear, Brenner either. Ostrich I couldn't hear at all, and I remember thinking, with the specific clarity of a man who has run out of time to be tactful, that if Ostrich was the one who did not come back up, the debrief on the surface was going to be much shorter. 4 dive companies this season, 4 refusals on this same stone, and every one of them had cost the shell above us another foot of coral it could not spare. Whatever the null tide was, 4 kings had died to keep it in, and it was already coming through. Above me, the shell was already going. It didn't crack the way a mirror cracks. It cracked the way a spine cracks. One long report, and then the ugly follow-up, the settling, the finding out, the small pieces working loose while the big piece decides. I felt it in the roof of my mouth. I felt it in the tin can of my own head. Somewhere behind the shell, 100 tons of something older than the kingdom of Pellwick's grandfather leaned forward against the last of the coral and tested its weight. I had not known there was a deadline. That is the thing I keep coming back to. Nobody had known, and none of the 4 companies before us had heard the clock, because the clock did not tick. It cracked once at the end. And by then, whatever you were going to say to Halveth, you had already failed to say. Barely, through the wet, Rafe. I did not turn. I could not have turned. My neck was locked at the angle I had craned it at when Halveth said the word, and there was blood running down inside my collar and pooling in the hollow at my collarbone. And every time I swallowed, I could taste iron and salt fighting each other for the same square inch. The shell. I see it. How long? Not long. Somewhere to my left, Brenner made a sound that in a man that size and that stubborn had to be classified as a groan, though he would have knifed me for calling it that on the surface. Pellwick's breathing changed rhythm, the small professional shift a medic makes when he starts triaging himself. Ostrich said nothing. Ostrich had said his last useful thing 11 minutes ago, and I had not obeyed it, and I was not going to obey the next one either. The wheel in my chest turned. I felt the click of it, the way you feel the last tooth of a key, finding the last tumbler of a lock. 1 rotation. That was what I had left. 1 spin of a skill the whole town of Pellwick had laughed at me for drawing, against a hero soul in coral armor who had already refused better captains than me. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I have had time to lie about it, and I would like to get on record before I forget. What I felt was not courage. It was a very specific and very small kind of clarity. Halveth's silver eyes had not moved off me. 3 centuries of standing at a post nobody had come to relieve, and he was looking at me the way a man on the last hour of a long watch looks at the shape coming up the road, measuring. I understood then what the others had gotten wrong. Every company before me had come to claim him. I wasn't here to claim anything. I had 1 sentence. I had been building it, without knowing I was building it. Since a Tuesday 6 weeks ago, in a town that smelled like gutted mackerel and wet rope, through a glowing bait fish in a drifter's blind cone, standing between a shade and a man who hated me. In the small, quiet hour, Sion had turned her logbook toward me and said, "That is not random," and I had said, "I don't know yet." I knew now. I lifted my chin so he could see my face, so he could see it was a face and not a title. Above him, the shell gave up another foot of coral, and the report went through the water like a struck drum. Jean made a small sound behind me that I would not, later, ask her to explain. The wheel in my chest steadied. The needle trembled at the edge of a slot I had never seen a wheel land on before, and would not have believed possible if I had not already, twice now. Watched this same wheel put the impossible answer inside the impossible cone. I opened my mouth. I said the one thing nobody else had thought to say. White all the way through, a white with no floor and no ceiling that did not, for a long second, contain me. 6 weeks earlier on a Tuesday in a town that smelled like gutted mackerel and wet rope, I drew a stone I should not have drawn. Chapter 2. Pellwick, and the stone I should not have drawn. 6 weeks earlier on a Tuesday, my father pressed a copper into my palm before we walked down from the house. He didn't have to say what it was for. Every man in Pellwick carried a copper on lottery day for the same reason his father had carried one, because if the priest called your name, you paid the temple a coin on the way past the basket, and if the priest did not call your name, you spent it on ale by noon and were glad of the trade. I was 22. I had carried the coin 4 times before, and 4 times it had gone to ale. The Tide-Clergy rep that morning was a woman I didn't know, sent up from the district seat, they said, because our own priest had taken sick in the wet season and never come back. She wore the ceremonial glove on her right hand, the long one, salt cracked at the knuckles where the leather had been folded and unfolded through 100 lotteries in 100 towns like ours. The glove looked tired. It had already seen more names than it wanted to. She read the covenant from the plate. The words were old enough that half of them weren't words anymore, just sounds you made with your mouth in the right order. The gulls said the responses without listening. By the warden's hand, by the warden's water, by the warden's watch, the basket is drawn. She reached in with a gloved hand. The first stone came up. She read the mark on its underside and called the name. Halden. Halden was 51 and a cooper. His wife made a small sound like she'd been hit low. Halden walked up to the platform and put his copper in the bowl and stood aside. He looked like a man who had already been expecting the day for a long time and was relieved, finally, to have it. The second stone, then the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth. Each name met with a small collapsing sound the seawall made when it recognized one of its own. My father was standing on my left. I could feel the heat of him through his coat. He had not moved once since the reading began. He was breathing in the shallow, careful way men breathe when they are counting stones and counting the ones left in the basket, and doing the arithmetic of how many draws are still possible against how many men are still standing on the seawall. 1 stone left. A lot of men left. The rep reached into the basket a 7th time. The glove came up. She turned the stone under her thumb to read the mark, and her mouth did a thing I did not at 22 know how to read. She read the name a 2nd time to herself before she said it. Rafe Dunmor. The coin in my palm went cold. My hand had gone cold, and the coin had only stayed where it was. The seawall did not react at once. It took a beat, long enough for the gulls to fill the beat with their own noise. Then my father put his hand on the small of my back, not pushing, just placing, and I walked up the platform steps because there was nowhere else to walk to. I dropped the copper in the bowl. It made the wrong sound flat, where all 6 before mine had rung. The rep did not step back. She turned to face the seawall, lifted the glove, and spoke the second half of the covenant, the half the town does not say the responses to, because the town is not the one being addressed. By the warden's water the stone is read. Let the skill be shown. The status window bloomed above me in the air the way status windows bloom, not projected, not written, simply present, the way a bruise is present, the morning after the blow that made it. Brine green, legible from the far end of the seawall, legible from the boats. Legible, I understood later, from the upstairs window of every house on Harbor Row where the wives and the smaller children and the men too old to stand had gathered to watch. I read it 3 times. The first time I did not believe it, the second time I understood it. The third time I understood what everyone else on the seawall was, at that moment, also reading. Rank, flotsam. The lowest rank the temple assigns below the working ranks, below the ranks the temple bothers to name properly. Flotsam is what the tide brings in, and what the tide takes back out, and what the fishermen kick aside when they are hauling something worth having. Results, random, not variable, not conditional. Random. And then, because the temple, in its record-keeping, has a sense of humor no one asked it to have, the 2 words at the bottom. Good luck. The seawall was not cruel. That is the part I want to be honest about. The seawall was kind. The seawall pitied me, and every man and woman on it arranged their mouth into the shape a mouth makes when it is trying not to be seen doing so. Halden on the platform beside me put a hand on my shoulder. a cooper's hand, thick and warm, and squeezed once and let go. The apprentice sailmaker beside him would not look at me at all. That was the worst of it, worse than anything Brenner Kesk would say to me later at abyss depth, because Brenner's contempt was math and the seawall's pity was not. I looked for my father. He was still standing where I had left him. He had not moved. His face was doing something I had no framework for. Not shame, not grief, not pride, though there were elements of the last two arranged in a proportion I could not name. Months later, in the bell, in the dark, on the ascent line from Darkfold with the Wraith's cost, still burning cold in my chest, I would think back to my father's face on the seawall and I would understand, finally, one thing about it, but not that morning. That morning I only saw that he was looking at me the way a man looks at a boat he has built himself and has just watched the sea decide to keep. The rep closed the covenant. The 7 of us stood in a row on the platform while she read the assignments off her ledger, Halden to a coastal outfit out of Marrow. The others to companies whose names I did not catch because I was waiting for mine. Rafe Dunmor. Company Saltmere. Report in 9 days. Saltmere. Deep descent. Abyss rated. The company that took the contracts the coastal outfits could not survive. I had heard the name in the way boys in fishing towns hear the names of things that happen to other people. The rep stepped down. The covenant was done. The seawall began slowly to unmake itself into the shape of an ordinary morning. The caulkers back to their tar. The mackerel crates back to the wagons. The wives back up Harbor Road to their kitchens. Halden's wife walked up onto the platform and took his arm and led him away without a word. Nobody came up onto the platform for me. My father did not come up. He stayed where he was at the foot of the steps, and when I came down he took the coat off his own shoulders and put it around mine, which was the closest either of us knew how to come to speech. The conscription notice arrived that afternoon. A boy from the district office on a mule, with a satchel of them, one for each of the 7, folded and sealed, delivered door to door as if the seawall had not made it public already. My father took mine at the doorway and read it, and set it on the kitchen table, and then, without saying anything, went out to the shed and did not come back until the light was gone. I sat with the notice at the table. I read it more times than the status window. Company Saltmere, 9 days, and the things she had not said aloud. I understood only that the seawall had read my window and pitied me, and that the pity had a name, Flotsam, and that I would be carrying the name on a company manifest in 9 days. Chapter 3. Company Saltmere. I had never seen a ship built to sink on purpose. The paper had my name on it, and the company seal and a set of numbers I did not understand yet. The deckhand read the numbers. He read them a second time. Then he stepped aside and did not say welcome aboard. You're the lottery. He said it the way a shopkeeper reads a delivery slip. He was standing at the top of the companionway in a dark oilcloth coat with the Saltmere braid at the cuff, tall, thin at the jaw, the thinness of a man who does calculation without needing paper. Rafe Dunmor reporting as ordered. Ostrich Vale, Captain. Put your bag in the 3rd berth on the starboard side. Don't unpack yet. I want you at the chart table in 10 minutes. He looked at me the way my father had looked at nets, checking for knots, checking for weight, checking whether the thing in his hand would hold what he needed it to hold. I had my kit bag on one shoulder and a status window in my chest I could not turn off, and Ostrich Vale had already decided what I was for. Blade set, 1 strike, deep cycle, costs me 11 of the well. 2 strikes, 23, 3, 38, 4, 56, 5 empties me, and I'm useless for the rest of the descent. You want to know why I'm telling you the numbers? Yes. Because you're going to spin something, and every point that comes off the well for your spin is a point that isn't in my 6th strike. RNG at abyss depth is a corpse waiting to happen. I would rather the corpse not be mine. He said it the way a man reads the tide table. Brenner Kesk, primary edge. I could see the shape of him, heavy across the shoulders, hands nicked in the pattern of a man who worked without gloves, and I could see the ledger he ran in his head. And I was a line item on the wrong side of it. I did not speak. I put my kit bag on the 3rd bunk. Ord, Peric, Medic, drink this before you go to the chart table. Ostrich talks fast, and the tea helps. Thank you. You're welcome. He was the only one on that ship who used the word welcome to me in the 10 days I was aboard her. He said it once over a tin cup of something bitter and root dark, and he never took it back and he never made me pay for it. I remember every man who has done that for me. There have not been many. Ashcroft, he's here. I heard him on the ladder. She did not turn. She finished the arc. She set the stylus down flush with the top edge of the chart. Then she turned and she looked at me the way Ostrich had looked at me. But the calculation was different. Ostrich had been weighing what I could do. Sion Ashcroft was weighing what I would cost. I have already sent the captain the numbers on what your wheel takes off the shared well per pull. I am telling you I know them so you understand that if the arithmetic goes wrong down there, I will know whose it was. Understood. I hope so. Later I would learn what she had written next to my name in the logbook that morning. 2 words and a comma. Liability provisional. She only added others after them. The Sunken Throne, Halveth the Warden. 3 centuries dormant, currently entering succession phase. His soul comes to contract this month, or it does not come at all. Whoever holds the succession contract holds the depth anchor for the northern trench for the next century. Lord Felon would like that to be him. Lord Felon is paying us to make it him. 3 rival companies are already in the water: Marrowvale, Cindercrest, and the Black Line out of Vent. Marrowvale is a month ahead of us with better maps. Cindercrest has better edges, Black Line has more money, and we have a lottery. There was a pause at the table then that was not silence. Silence is what happens when nobody has anything to say. This was the other thing. This was 4 professionals making a private accommodation with the shape of what they had been given to work with, in front of the thing they had been given. The tide well is shared. I want everyone hearing this out loud from me and not learning it in the water. Every spin Dunmor takes comes off the well before it comes off him. Every point he spends on a draw is a point Kesk does not have for a 6th strike. Every point he spends on a bad draw is a stroke Kesk loses that he was counting on. If Dunmor spins and the result is useful, the cost was investment. If Dunmor spins and the result is a fish, the cost was theft. I am not making a moral claim. I'm telling you the arithmetic, so nobody down there mistakes it for anything else. Understood, Captain. I watched the resentment on his face change shape. It had come aboard with him already. I had felt it in the berth, but it had been a shapeless thing, a man's dislike of a boy with a joke skill sitting on his crew. Now it was a ledger with my name at the top of the debit column and his 6th strike at the bottom. That is a worse kind of hatred than the other kind. The other kind, you can talk out of a man. The arithmetic kind, you have to pay off. Dunmor. Captain, do you understand what has been explained? I do. Good. Ashcroft has the first ascent, Kesk has the edge protocol, Ord has the medical. You will listen and you will not speak unless asked. Are we clear? Clear. I stood there another second because I did not know if I had been dismissed. Pellwick, without looking at me, tapped the rim of my tin cup on the table twice. It meant drink it, and I drank it. It was bitter, and it was warm, and it settled a thing in my stomach I had not known was loose. I set the cup down, and I stepped back from the table, and Ostrich did not look up, and Brenner did not look up, and Sion was writing in her logbook the whole time. Try not to spin unless we tell you to. Chapter 4. A glowing bait fish. The lock hissed green, and the door in the floor of the world opened. 5 of us stepped through it into brine-lit dark. My tide, well read out, ticked up in the corner of my vision and joined the shared bar, a slim green sliver against everyone else's, the newest number in a column that had been running for years. I watched the sliver a second too long. Sion passed me without a word, and I moved. The shelf was a coral flat the size of a village square, sloped, canted like a plate somebody had set down and forgotten, overhangs everywhere. The kind of place where a thing with teeth could stand 2 meters from you and be a rumor. Sound stopped being sound down there. It became weight. Brenner's fin kicks reached me as pressure at the base of my skull. Ostrich's voice on the line was a small, dry click behind my teeth, and Pellwick at the rear breathed through his regulator in a pattern I already recognized as deliberate, long in, long out, teaching me the pace without turning around. Column, Sion front, Brenner 2, Newman 3, Pellwick sweep. Newman, he had my name, he was not going to use it yet. Overhangs left of the trench, 2 vision cones I don't like, slow through. Copy slow. The trench opened under us like a seam a knife had made in the coral. We went along the lip. My well ticked down half a point just from the ambient draw. The abyss taxes you for being in it, and it does not care if you have earned the tax yet. I saw it before Sion called it, which meant I had not seen it. I had felt the light lie. Drifter, left overhang, do not. The brack scale came out of the coral the way a hand comes out of a sleeve. It was 3 meters, and mostly jaw and the scales along its flank were the color of the coral it had been under, and by the time I understood what it was inside Sion's cone and closing on Brenner's flank. Blade set 1. Hold. I spun. I want to be honest about this. I did not center, I did not frame the question, I panicked. The wheel in my chest lurched into rotation because I told it to, and I told it to because there was a thing with teeth 2 meters from a man who hated me, and I could not think of what else to do. The needle wobbled, it caught, it dropped. A fish the length of my hand appeared in the water in front of the brackscale's face. It was the palest green I had ever seen a living thing be. It glowed the way rot glows on a wet piling at midnight. It had no teeth and no armor, and it swam in a small confused circle as if somebody had just woken it up and it did not know whose dream this was. What in the deep is that? The brackscale's head jerked. Its jaw opened halfway and stopped. Its eyes, small, set high, oil black, went briefly and completely to the eel. 4 seconds. I counted them because I had nothing else to do with my hands. 1. The drifter's body slowed a half-beat, momentum stalling against its own confusion. 2. Brenner's blade set came out of the sheath at his hip in a motion so economical it looked lazy. 3. He was inside the drifter's guard. 4. The blade went in along the gill line the way a key goes in a lock. The brackscale folded, its weight took it down into the trench, and the trench took it the rest of the way. The eel dimmed and went out like a coal somebody had stepped on. My well was down 11 points. Everyone else's was down 3, which meant 8 of those 11 had been mine, and 3 had been theirs, and the 3 had been theirs because I had spent them. New man. Here. Come here. I finned to him. The coral under my hand was warm, which meant something had been alive on it very recently. Brenner's faceplate was a green square with a face behind it, and the face was not moving. That's your power. I know how it... A glowing baitfish. He said it flat, not shouted. Shouted I could have answered. Flat was a verdict. You cost me 2 blade strokes of well to make a lure. I could have made a lure with a strip of my own glove, and it would have cost nothing. It worked. It cost. There is a difference between things that work and things that cost less than they earn. Learn it before the next one, or don't come on the next one. He turned. His fin kick pushed a small silt cloud into my faceplate. Column. Move on. Scion front. We moved on. Here is the thing I did not say. Here is the thing I put in a room in my head and closed the door on and did not open again for the rest of the shelf. The eel had not appeared near the drifter's face. It had appeared inside the cone of what the drifter's eyes could see, through the doorway, not beside it. The wheel had put a small, useless glowing fish in the one place a brackscale could not fail to see it. At the one moment a brackscale needed to be looking at something that was not Brenner. A useless power placed with a jeweler's hand. I filed it. I did not tell anyone. 2 cones right of the chimney. Brenner, blade set. Blade set. Copy. New man. Hold. Hold. I held. The wheel in my chest ticked once. The way a horse shifts a hoof in a stall, I did not spin. I watched Brenner go into the chimney, and I watched Sion read the geometry of the water, and I watched the second drifter come out of the shadow 8 seconds after the first, and I watched Brenner's blade set take it apart in 2 strokes because he had known the second was there. My well did not move. The shared bar did not move because of me. We took 3 more contacts across the shelf, a ribbon eel, a tide worm the length of a rope, a young drifter no bigger than a dog. I did not spin for any of them. My hand went to the wheel twice, and I put it back down twice, and the second time I put it down Sion was looking at me across the column. She did not write anything down. She did not have her logbook with her at 60 meters, but she was writing anyway, the way she wrote, behind her eyes in a column I could not see. Shelf clear, ascent line, 10-meter stops, Pellwick, sweep. Sweep clear. I hung on the line between the 20 and the 30, and I let the pressure come off my ears in the slow, honest way, and I looked down at the wheel in my chest. Still on its bearing. not still in me. Somewhere in me a room I had closed the door on was very quietly furnished with a chair and a table and a lamp, and on the table there was a small, useless glowing fish, and it was placed exactly at the center of the doorway. The line pulled me up. I let it. Chapter 5. What the Shades Filter For. We were 8 hours off the murk shelf, and I had not yet said out loud what the eel had shown me. I was working on it. I was working on it the way a man works on a splinter he cannot see, turning the hand, catching the light, waiting to feel the shape of a thing before he tried to pull it. Then the hatch banged open, and the wire runner came down the ladder with C in his hair and a wax-sealed pouch in his teeth, and the shape of what I was working on stopped mattering for a while. Ashen Fleet, Company Varish, Darkfold Rift, they hit shades and they broke. How many? 2 lost. Retreat under signal. Their captain's writing your captain a private line, sir. 2 lost was not the number that mattered, and Ostrich knew it. Varish had 8 in the water. Losing 2 to Shades meant 6 had walked away from something the Shades had let walk. That was the number worth writing down. Varish's edge was Marden Kale. Blade set of 19. He does not lose to a pressure ghost. He lost. Then it wasn't a pressure ghost. The Shades aren't killing, they're filtering. He said it half to the chart, half to himself, the way a man notes a tide is running a quarter knot fast, a fact that would affect the day and nothing about him. He said it once. He did not say it twice. He wrote a number in the margin of the chart in his small square hand and moved on. Pellwick toxin stores. Full at 4, half at 6, antitoxin low. I flagged it at Saltmere and it was not ordered. Note it. Currents at the rift are running against the manifest. Varish's report puts the drift east by 14 degrees. That's not seasonal. Note it. Ostrich moved on. I did not. I sat with my hands around a tin that had lost its heat long ago, and I let the word he had put in the middle of the table sit there, filtering. A word from the shore. The word for what you did when you wanted the water out and the fish, when you wanted the small stones out and the large. He had said plainly that he did not know what the Shades were sieving for. He had noted it as tactical intelligence and turned the page. I could not turn it. I could feel the eel in the vision cone the way you feel a coin in a coat you have not worn since winter, and I could feel this new word pressing against it edge to edge. And I did not yet have a name for the shape they made together, but I knew the shape had a name. Eat that. You've had tea for 6 hours and it isn't food. My first dive. Yeah. I spent my whole well on a guess, whole thing, a guess about where a Grimjaw was going to break, and I was wrong by about 10 degrees. The well hit 0 and stayed there, and my captain had to bleed his own reserve to get us up. Nobody died, but nobody spoke to me for a month either, not one of them, and I ate at that table alone for 4 weeks without so much as the salt passed my way. What did you do? Kept eating, learned the second month what I should have known the first. Told you now because it seemed the right time to tell you. He was putting a stone on the table and pushing it across with 2 fingers and leaving it where I could pick it up or not. It was the first kindness anyone on this company had given me that had no ledger behind it, and I understood, sitting there with my cold spoon halfway to my mouth, that Pellwick Ord had been doing this for a long time and had watched a great many young men fail to notice the stone. I noticed it and let the noticing stand instead of thanks. That was not what the stone was for. I had not seen the logbook before. It came out of her coat like something she had been waiting to take out and had chosen this moment for a reason I could not read. Captain. Jeanin. Are we counting Varish's 6 as past or as cold? What's the distinction? If the Shades are filtering, the 6 who walked away because the Shades allowed it. That is not the same as passing, that is being set aside. For what purpose? I don't know yet. Then it doesn't affect the brief. Sit down. Ostrich had not asked me. He had not looked at me since the pouch landed. He was working the way he worked, surface plan next dive commission, and the word he had put in the middle of the table had already ceased to be his. It was mine now. And I could see in the small motion of Sion's hand over her closed coat that it was hers too, and that she was not going to give it back to him, and that she had already begun to write a book he was not going to read. Descent brief. Darkfold Rift, 2nd tier, abyssal jaw crab confirmed at the lip. Sion takes point on the geometry. Brenner holds primary edge. Blade set conserved for the crab, not the Shades. Pellwick, 2nd line, medical. I hold overwatch on the tether. And him, Rafe. Do not spin unless I tell you. Understood, Captain. Say it back to me. Do not spin unless you tell me. Good. Descent in the fourth watch. Rest until then. Peric, antitoxin. Do what you can with what we have. I sat with her, or she sat with me. I could not have said which, for the space of about a minute after the hatch closed behind Ostrich. Neither of us said anything. She looked at the porthole. I looked at the wet ring the pouch had left on the paper. Then she stood and touched 2 fingers to the closed coat over the logbook, the smallest possible gesture, and went out. I lay on my back with my boots off, and my hands folded on my chest. And I let the word Ostrich had dropped and walked away from run underneath everything the way an undercurrent runs beneath a surface tide filter, not killed, set aside. And the 6 who had walked because something about them was not what the shades wanted out of the water, and the 2 who had been taken had been... I did not know what the sieve wanted. I did not know if I was small stones or large. I knew because the eel had appeared in the exact blind arc of the drifter's sight, and because I had been the only one on the murk shelf who had noticed, and because I was not going to tell Ostrich that the wheel in my chest was answering a question I had not learned to ask on purpose. And I knew that Ostrich would not tell me not to spin at Darkfold if he did not already suspect he was going to need me to. Do not spin unless I tell you. He had made me say it back to him. I had said it back. I meant it as far as it went. It did not go as far as he thought it did. And I understood that lying on my bunk in the green light of a caged bulb, the way a man understands he has already made a decision and is only waiting for the world to require it of him. I was going to spin because the shades were filtering, and I was going to make sure the sieve caught me on the side of what I wanted to be, and not on the side Ostrich was already arranging me toward. The fourth watch, the descent horn. I sat up and reached for my boots. Chapter 6. The pressure wraith and the worst day of my life. The green light ticked to nothing at the lip. That was the phrase Cyan used on the descent brief, and she was right. And I remember thinking she was right in the exact second the last of the shelf glow died under my boots, and Darkfold swallowed the color out of the water. Below us there was no floor. There was a suggestion of floor the way a room in a burning house is a suggestion of a room. I looked at my readout. Full. Untouched since Merc's shelf. The shared bar beside it held 4 other names and 4 other reserves, and Brenner's already sat lower than the rest because blade set costs to carry, not only to swing. Manifest said Tier 2 crustacean, jaw crab, juvenile. 2 edges plus Kesk closes it in under a minute. Ord holds the line. Ashcroft calls seams. Dunmor does nothing. Copy. Dunmor, repeat it. Nothing. Ostrich's voice on the tethercom had the flatness he used when he was already writing the after report in his head. We dropped another 20 fathoms. The tickers on our chest plates read down through the numbers the way a man reads the last of his own money. The jaw crab was not juvenile. It came up out of a shelf we had already walked past. The shelf was not a shelf. The shelf was its back, and when it lifted a section of the floor the size of the Bell's foredeck, and the 2 B-rank edges, Hesk and Marrow, whose names I want to keep, were standing on that section when it stood up. Contact. Contact rear. Toxin, I'm toxin. The rear mandibles opened and closed once, a slow scissoring, and a plume of something the color of tea went through the water and around both of them before Peric could get a bead. Their reserves crashed on the shared bar, numbers falling in a way that felt less like combat and more like watching 2 men fall off a roof. Hesk down, Marrow down, Toxin class. I need them on the ascent line. I need them now. Kesk, close it. Ashcroft, seam. There's no seam on the dorsal veil. It's carapace all the way to the hinge. Working. Kesk, close it. Brenner's blade set flared, 3 strokes off the top of his reserve, and each stroke rang against its back like a hammer on a locked door. It did not turn. It did not need to. A foreleg came around in the slow way large things move underwater, and Brenner took the leg on his brace and dropped 1.5 fathoms before the tether caught him. His reserve dropped to 1/4, and the fight had lasted 11 seconds, and Ostrich was still issuing orders that were no longer landing on the crew moving beneath him. I had spent nothing. My bar sat where it had sat since morning, full, stupid, useless. I closed my eyes for 1 second, which is a long time on the sea floor, and I did the thing I had not done on Merc Shelf. On Merc Shelf I had spun because I was afraid. I made myself sit inside the question until I had it in the right shape. Who needs what? I spun. I had never seen the word deep current on my readout. I did not know it was a rank. The status window bloomed in the water in front of me, and I read it once, and my hands went cold inside my gauntlets. You do not, in the training manuals, negotiate with a draw. Draws arrive and do what they do, and this one held itself just out of my faceplate, a shape that was more of a pressure than a shape, waiting the way a shopkeeper waits for you to name a price. Dunmor. Your reserve just spiked. What are you doing? Working. Dunmor, do not spin without working, Vale. The ask arrived in my head the way I imagine a bell arrives in the head of the bell. Not words, a shape of a want. It wanted a memory of a specific weight, something I did not use anymore, something I had already paid for and was still, out of habit, carrying. I did not have to think about which one. I gave it lottery day, the whole day. The tar smell of the pier, the copper coin my father pressed into my palm, the 7 stones in the clergy rep's basket, and the one I drew that everybody watched me draw. I gave it the crowd's pity on the seawall, and I gave it my father's face doing the complicated thing it had done, the thing I still, in the water at Darkfold, had not understood. It took the offer. I felt the take. I felt the day go. It did not go the way a memory goes when you forget it. It went the way a coat goes when you take it off in a warm room. There. Underbelly seam, port side ring, 2nd segment, Kesk, port side, 2nd ring. Scene. Brenner's blade set closed on what was left of his reserve, 2 strokes. The first opened the ring. The second went through the seam Sion had called and into whatever the crab kept behind that seam. And it shuddered the way a very large thing shudders when the thing that was holding it together stops. It did not die cleanly. Nothing at that depth dies cleanly. It went down onto the shelf that was not a shelf, and it kept moving for a full minute after Brenner pulled his edge back, and Pellwick was already on Hesk and Marrow before it stopped. Ascent line, both of them now, Ashcroft. Cut me a lane. Cut. Confirm evac, 2 on the line, Kesk. Cover the ascent. Brenner covered the ascent. He had almost nothing left to cover it with, and he covered it anyway, and I watched him do it and did not spin again. My readout, when I looked, sat at 41%. I did not remember it dropping. Cost is not always where you expect it. Cost had gone somewhere the readout did not measure and taken lottery day with it as change. We came up without speaking for a long time. Brenner's hand on the line beside mine was shaking in a small, contained way I had not seen before and would not, later, remark on. Pellwick's voice on the comm was doing the medical thing it did, calm and unhurried, and Hesk and Marrow were both breathing, and one of them was going to keep breathing on the bell, and one of them, I would learn at surface, would not. Company Saltmere was 4. I had not seen inside the logbook before. Nobody on the bell had, that I knew of. She held it in front of my faceplate at Darkfold's mid-column and let me read it in the green half-light of the ascent lamps, and what she had drawn on the page was 2 things. One was the Merc Shelf engagement, plotted in overhead, the drifter's vision cone, the eel's manifestation, and a small, tight circle where the 2 intersected. The other was the jaw crab, its dorsal blind arc, plotted from the sight lines of a rear-mounted compound eye she had catalogued on the descent I had not known she was cataloguing. The wraith's manifestation, and a small, tight circle where the 2 intersected. The 2 circles on her page were the same size. 2 pulls, 2 geometrically perfect placements. That is not random. What are you doing? I looked at her through the faceplate. Her eyes on the other side of her own faceplate did not have the dismissal in them anymore. They had something colder and more useful, which was attention. I don't know yet. Chapter 7. The Framing of the Question. She had turned the book toward me on the ascent line, and she had not turned it back. That was the piece I could not stop noticing. It sat between us on the mess table now, open to the page she had shown me and the 2 pages after it, and she had not once put her hand over any of them to keep me from reading. The tea was Pellwick's. He had set it down between us at the start of watch change and gone back to his corner without a word. Neither of us had touched it. The steam had given up 10 minutes in. The drifter first. Show me where the eel was. She slid a stub of graphite across the page toward me, her eyes still on the diagram. You want me to draw. I want you to place it on the diagram. The diagram was the drifter, rendered in the flat cross-section navigators used, 3 overlapping cones for its stacked eyes, dotted lines for the strike arcs, a small notation in her own hand for the toxin range. It was careful work. It was the work of someone who had already decided a thing was worth working on. Here. I put the graphite where the eel had appeared, not near the vision cones, inside them. At the seam where the middle cone overlapped the lower one, at the depth where a moving thing would confuse both at once. I set the graphite down. Jeanne considered the mark for a long moment. Then she took the graphite back, and without saying anything she drew a small tight circle around it, and next to the circle she wrote a number, and next to the number she wrote another number. And I did not know what either of them meant. Now the jaw crab. The wraith, same thing. She turned the page. The jaw crab was worse, not the drawing. The drawing was as careful as the first. Worse because I remembered where the wraith had gone, and I remembered it with the sick clarity of a thing you have not stopped seeing since it happened. I put the graphite down at the point on the underside, where the plate seams gave. The exact flank Sion had read in one glance in the water. The place the wraith had already been standing before she read it. She took the graphite back, same tight circle, same 2 numbers. 2 pulls, 2 placements. The eel is inside a vision cone by 4 centimeters. The wraith is on the seam by less than that. She turned the book flat and slid it the last inch toward me. Random draws don't do that. I know. Do you? I know now. I said it carefully because I was not sure yet what I knew and what I was only starting to suspect, and Sion was not a person you offered a suspicion to as if it were a fact. She had done the geometry. If I said the wrong shape of thing here, she would put the book back in her coat, and it would be a year before she took it out again. Try it. Try what? The shape of it out loud, however far you've got. I looked at the porthole, the sheet lead water. The way the light through it was not really light, more the memory of light that had happened somewhere above us and been strained through 100 fathoms before it reached the glass. In Pellwick, the first spin, I was scared, thinking about not dying mostly. The eel came out. It was small. It did almost nothing. It did just enough that Brenner could finish the thing in 3 strokes instead of 5. And at the rift. I wasn't thinking about not dying at the rift. I was thinking about the 2 of them going down from the toxin, and Peric's redouts, and the crab specifically, where it couldn't see, what it couldn't cover with its own body. The wraith came out. She wrote something. She did not show me. When I think about winning, the pull is weak. When I think about a specific person in front of me who needs a specific thing, it isn't. It answers clear need, not want. The mess cabin was very quiet. The bell rocked once, gently, on the current at holding depth. The tea moved in the pot. Can you steer it? I can frame the question. She wrote that down. I watched her write it. 6 words in her small hand on the 3rd page. Then she drew a line under them. Then she drew a second line under the first, harder, so the graphite left a groove. There were other lines on that page, above the 6 words, below them. Whole columns of notation I could not read, her own shorthand. Densities and depth signatures, and something that looked like a probability table with a column for something she had labeled only with a small square. She did not turn the book so I could read those. She did not turn it so I could not. Good. From his corner, without looking up. Don't tell anyone else the shape of that. I wasn't going to. I know, I'm telling you anyway. I understood the second sentence a beat after she said it. She was not warning me off the crew, she was warning me off one man. Neither of us was going to say his name in the mess cabin, but the names sat between us the way the tea sat between us, gone cold and still on the table. Dunmor, my cabin. The click ended. Sion's hand did not move off the cover of the logbook until the intercom was silent for 3 full seconds. Then it moved, then she stood. Go. I went. He did not sit down, he did not tell me to. He let me stand a half step inside the door, and he looked at me the way a man looks at a tool he is deciding whether to sharpen or replace. The rift. Sir. You spun without permission at the shelf. You spun without permission at the rift, twice. Without permission, the pull was usable. He said usable like a man tasting a word he had considered and rejected 3 other words for. He had wanted a stronger word. He had decided a stronger word would give me leverage he was not prepared to hand over. I want to know how it works. I don't know how it works. You're not required to know how it works. You're required to answer a question about the pattern. There is a pattern. I said nothing. I let him have the silence. Jean had told me not to give the shape of it to anyone else, and Pellwick had said good from his corner, and I did not fully understand yet why those two were the same instruction, but I understood well enough to keep my mouth closed. I'll tell you what I've observed then. You can correct me or you can decline to correct me. The wheel answers under pressure. He watched my face when he said it. I kept my face where it was. So we apply pressure, and we let it answer. He said we. He did not mean we. He meant the company as a lever, and the lever's fulcrum was the man standing a half step inside his door, and the load on the far end was whatever Ostrich needed lifted for the commission to sit where he wanted it to sit. He was doing arithmetic out loud and letting me hear it because he thought the sound of arithmetic would be enough to make me useful. Do you disagree? No, sir. Do you agree? I heard you, sir. He looked at me a moment longer. Then he nodded once, small, to himself, the nod of a man confirming an entry in a ledger, and sat down at his desk and drew the commission folder toward him. That was the dismissal. I had not been dismissed with a word. I had been dismissed with the closing of his attention. I stood in the corridor for a count of 5 with my hand on the door I had just closed, and I understood a thing I had been circling for 2 dives without letting myself say. The captain and the crew were not the same thing. It was a hull, and a chart room, and one man's political commission, and 4 people who had by now, one way or another, some of them without meaning to, put something of themselves on a table in front of me. Sion's logbook, Pellwick's stew, Brenner's silence, which was its own kind of ledger entry, and a captain in the small cabin behind me who had just told me plainly that he intended to put pressure on the crew in order to make the wheels spin. I filed it beside the eel. I filed it beside the wraith. I filed it in the same drawer I had started keeping since Pellwick, the drawer I had not yet named. The one where I put the things I would need to know when the moment came to choose which of 2 directions to stand. I would have to choose. That was the part I had not let myself see until Ostrich had said we and meant something else. I would have to choose which of them I was diving for, and I would have to choose before we were deep enough that choosing became the same thing as dying. The next shade was close. I could feel it the way you feel weather coming off the water at home, not as a sound, not yet, but as a change in what the boat was doing under your feet. Jean would already be at her charts. Pellwick would already be laying out the medical kit. Brenner would already be in the arming rack, counting blade set strokes he had left, and hating that he had to count them at all. I let go of the door behind me. I walked forward through the green-lit corridor toward the descent lock. I did not look back at Ostrich's cabin because I had already made the file entry and it was not a thing that needed looking at twice. Chapter 8. Standing in front of Brenner. I felt it before Sion's readouts caught it. A weight against the eardrum that had no direction, the way weather has no direction on the last afternoon before a storm. My jaw ached. I worked it once, and Pellwick, 3 meters behind me on the tether line, worked his the same way and looked at me and said nothing. Contact. Bearing, everywhere. Well tick starting. The shared bar on my wrist began to bleed downward, not fast, steady, the way a candle burns in a room without wind. 74. I watched the number, and the number watched me back. Kesk, blade set. Take it down. Sir. Brenner unshipped the primary. I heard the click of the blade set couplers seating and knew, without turning what Ostrich had just spent, Brenner's blade set was 3 deep strikes. 3 in the entire company's economy. He had used 1 on the jaw crab already. This would be the second, leaving 1 stroke for the throne, for whatever the shell was holding back. For the descent none of us had numbers on yet. Setting. I hadn't meant to move. I want that on the record, because everything after depends on it being true. I had spent the last 2 hours in the bell running Sion's geometry in my head, and the word filter had run under everything the way a tide runs under a hull. And when I stepped forward, I was not thinking about Halveth, or about the exam, or about any of what Pellwick had told me about a warden not owning the thing he guards. I was thinking about Brenner's 3rd stroke, and about what waited below us that would need it. Move. I didn't. I did not petition the shade. I did not name it. I did not make a speech. I stood. Dunmor, step back. Kesk set. Sir, he's in the ark. Step back. 47. I felt the drain in my chest before the number showed it, a small patient pull, like somebody taking a coin out of my pocket one finger at a time. The wheel behind my sternum was quiet, and I did not reach for it. I thought precisely and without flourish about the fact that Brenor Kesk hated me, and had hated me from the moment I stepped onto the gangway at Saltmere Quay, and that his hatred was mathematical and correct, and that the third stroke of his blade set was worth more than the last 4 hours of my life combined. Rate slowing. What? Drain rate. It's slowing. The number on my wrist confirmed it. 41 for a longer count than 47 had held, then 36. Then, after a pause that stretched almost long enough for Ostrich to give another order, 34. The pressure on my ears released. Perrick swallowed audibly. The green light of the corridor thickened, if that is possible, into something that was almost warmth. Interesting. That was the whole of what he said. He did not look at me when he said it, and I understood later that this was a kindness, that looking at me would have made the moment mean more than it was ready to me. Kesk, stand down. Sir. I heard the couplers unseat. I did not turn. Dunmor, my cabin. After watch. We finished the corridor in silence. Sion walked point. I walked where I had been walking. Brenner walked behind me, and I could feel him behind me the way you can feel a man who is trying to decide whether to speak, and choosing one step at a time, not two. Explain it. I can't. Try. I stepped in front of Brenner because the third stroke matters more than my well. That is not an explanation of what the shade did. That is an explanation of what you did. I know. He set the pen down, picked it up again. I watched him do the arithmetic of a report he was going to have to file in Felon's hand, and I watched him arrive, one column at a time, at the sentence he did not want to write. My conscript stood in front of my blade, and it worked, and I do not know why. No, sir. Get out. I got out. Ostrich's furious. I know. He'll be more furious when he understands why it worked. Do you understand? She looked up. Gray eyes, the pressure scar along her neck, a shade lighter than the skin around it in the mess cabin's lamplight. I understand the shape, not the sentence. That makes 2 of us. She smiled, not with warmth, she had not moved to warmth yet, but with the specific pleasure of a navigator who has correctly identified the outline of a coast in fog. Then she closed the logbook, slid it into her coat, left me the mess cabin and the shape of a sentence I could not yet read. I stood at the rail a long time, longer than the watch required. The bell hummed under my boots the way a house hums when the people in it have gone to bed and the wind outside has not. Chapter 9, The Retreating Company and the Door That Opens. The rival company came up out of the trench like something the sea had chewed and spat back. Her name was stenciled on the bow in salt-eaten paint. I could almost read, Corvid's Wake, out of Harrow, and she was running for surface fast enough that she wasn't stopping for weather or protocol or anyone else's flag. I stood at the rail in the wet dawn and counted her losses the way a man counts coin he does not have. 2 lifeboats gone from the port davits. A gash in her flank plating the size of a chapel door, patched with rubber sheet and prayer. And on her deck, laid out under a tarp the color of old bruises, the shape of one long body that no one had yet decided what to do with. Saltmere here. Vale speaking. Corvid's Wake. Merritt. Ostrich, you old bastard, turn around. I can't do that, Merritt. You're going for the throne. I am. The third shade tier is impassable. We hit it at well 60. It took Callan from behind us, not in front, behind. Do you understand what I'm telling you? It waited until our best sword was past it, and then it pulled him back through his own ranks. Blade set could not touch it. Depth charms could not touch it. Callan spent his whole well trying to make the thing acknowledge he was there, and it never once looked at him. It looked at me, and at my second, and at the boy on the winch, and never at Callan. And then it took him. Understood. Turn around, Ostrich. I heard you. We press. Nobody argued. Brenner did not look up from the winch. Perrick's hands did not stop coiling. Jean, wherever she was, would have heard it through the deck plates and written a single mark in her logbook that meant noted, disagreed, complying. That was Saltmere. We pressed. And Corvid's wake slid past us to starboard with her feathered screw and her tarp-shaped grief, and I watched her go until the gray ate her. I asked him about Halveth, because I had run out of other things to ask. Ostrich would not tell me. Brenner would sooner spit. Jean would answer the question I asked, and not the one I meant, which was worse. Perrick ate his cold stew and looked at me a while before he decided what to give me. The temple songs of my childhood remembered him. Remembered him how? Not as a warrior that comes later, the warrior part. The songs I learned had him as a man who refused 4 kings in a row. Refused them what? Whatever they were offering. Land, command, a daughter. One of them, if the song was honest. Halveth said no 4 times, and the 4th king took it badly and sent men, and Halveth went where the men couldn't follow, which in those days meant the coast. He died guarding a fishing village whose name the song did not bother to keep. That was the point of the song. Why is he called warden, then, if he wasn't a soldier? Because a warden doesn't own the thing he guards. That's the whole word, lad. A soldier fights for what belongs to him or to whoever pays him. A warden stands over what isn't his and never will be and does not leave. I filed that beside the eel in the vision cone, and beside standing in front of Brenner at well 34, and beside the line in Sion's logbook I had glimpsed but not read. I did not know yet what shape the pile was making. I only knew the pile was getting heavier, and that Perrick had just laid a stone on top of it he could not take back. Eat your stew, Rafe. It doesn't get warmer. It wasn't warm when you gave it to me. No, it wasn't. I gave her the silence. I had learned that much about her, at least. Sion Ashcroft's questions were not questions until she chose to ask them, and rushing her only cost the answer. The wraith. Yes. You gave it a memory. I did. Why that one? It was the worst day of my life. The lottery. The lottery, the stone, and my father's face, and the whole afternoon after. And it seemed fair. It seemed fair to spend it on something. She did not answer right away. She looked out at the pewter water and at nothing in it, and I watched the side of her face because I could not help watching the side of her face, and I thought, she is going to give me back a small piece of hers, not because she owes me, because a door only opens if 2 people set a hand to it. Mine was the dive that gave me this. I wondered. Everyone wonders. Nobody asks. I wasn't going to ask. I know. That's why I'm telling you. I would give it too. Give what? That day, the dive that did this. I would spend it, if it meant something. If a wraith asked me for it on the sea floor with the crew going gray behind me, I would give it and not blink. I believe you. I know you do. That's the other reason I'm telling you. I understood then, in the way a man understands weather, before he can name what changed in the air, that she was not making a declaration. She was opening a door. She was standing on her side of it and telling me the door was there, whether I walked through it, and when, and how, was going to be my part of the work. That was Sion. She would not carry the whole weight of a thing across to me. She would set half of it down on her side and wait. 4 inches. I could tell you I measured it later, and I would be lying. I measured it then, standing there, and I measured it the way a diver measures the last of his well, which is to say I did not take my eyes off the number, 4 inches of iron between her hand and mine, and neither of us closed it, and neither of us had to, because the door was already open. The door being open was the whole of what had been asked, and the whole of what had been answered. When you spin at the 3rd tier, if I spin, when? I've watched you. When you spin at the 3rd tier, I want you to frame the question the way you framed it at Darkfold, not the way you framed it at the Merc. Who needs what? Who needs what? All right. And Rafe, I'm listening. If the price is a memory and it's a bad one, and you have one to spend, spend it. Don't be sentimental about the bad ones. The bad ones are what we have. I won't be sentimental. Good. Jean's hand did not leave the rail, mine did not either. The horn's 2nd long note rolled out across the pewter and came back off the water thinner than it had gone. And I thought, because a man on the edge of a descent thinks strange things and remembers them, of Pellwick saying a warden doesn't own the thing he guards, and of Merit on the bell line saying it didn't look at him, and of a stone I should not have drawn 6 weeks ago in a town that smelled of gutted mackerel and wet rope, all of it in the same breath. All of it belonging somehow to the 4 inches of iron between her hand and mine. Time. We went below. Chapter 10. The Depth Sentinel and Brenner's Nod. Kesk, forward line. Ashcroft, read me the seam. Ord medical on Kesk, priority. Blade set at 41%, Captain. That's 4 strokes if I stretch them. 3 clean. Then stretch them. The first shade had drained us like a slow tap. This one had a mouth. I felt it inside my ears first, not sound, pressure, a pressure that made a man forget which way was up, because up had stopped being a direction and started being a suggestion. Rafe, eyes on me. She was 3 meters to my left. Her navigator's slate lit brine green against her chest, and she was not looking at the shade, she was looking at me. Not the wheel, me. I'm here. Good, stay there. Brenner stepped in with his first stroke. Blade set opened along his forearm in the 8-sigil pattern I had seen at Darkfold, and the light of it cut a clean arc through the shade's outer skin. The shade did not react. It kept draining, and the numbers kept sliding under us like a tide going out. Kesk is going gray. Vitals sliding, Captain. Evacuation window in 90 seconds. 90 seconds is enough. Kesk, second stroke. Captain, second stroke empties me for the throne. Then it empties you for the throne, second stroke. Brenner's mouth went a color I do not have a word for, not white, not gray. The color a man's mouth goes when he understands his captain has just chosen the next hour over the next day, and he is the price of that choice. I centered, not on the shade, not on winning, not on surviving. I centered on the specific fact of Brenner Kesk, who had hated me since Pellwick with a hatred I had earned by existing on his shared ledger, and who was about to spend himself out for a mission because his captain had told him to. The wheel in my chest turned, not fast, deliberate. The way a lock turns when the key is finally correct. System, read out. Dunmor, do not. What is it saying, Dunmor? Say it out loud. It's asking permission. Permission from me, granted, spin. Not from you, Captain. I turned my back on the shade. I did it slowly because doing it fast would have looked like fear, and I did not want the crew to think the fear was in the direction I was turning. The fear was in the direction I was turning toward. Brenner was on one knee. Pellwick had a hand under his elbow. Sion had not moved. Kesk. Don't. Kesk, the Sentinel needs your consent, on the record, to spend your stats, all of them, in front of the captain who put you here. You are asking the man you cost the most to give you the most. Yes. In front of the captain who put me here. In front of him, on the record. That's why I have to ask it out loud. The shade drained another 2% while I waited. I did not look. I kept my eyes on Brenner's face, which was the color of wet iron and getting worse, and I watched him do the arithmetic I had watched him do since the day I boarded, the cost per stroke. The blade set economics, the exact placement of his contempt in the ledger. He was not fast, he was thorough. He went around the crew once with his eyes, then back to me. On the record. On the record. He nodded. One nod, the way a man signs a document he does not want signed but understands must be. The wheel locked. The well emptied between one heartbeat and the next. Brenner's blade set flickered down to almost nothing. Pellwick's slate went from amber to red and then, a full second later, back to amber as if it had reconsidered. The Sentinel did not attack the shade. It stood in front of it. That was all. It stood between the shade and Brenner and the rest of us, and the shade, which had not reacted to blade set, which had not reacted to anything, withdrew. It went slowly. It went with the calm of something that had done its job. The pressure inside my ears eased in stages, 3 of them, each one distinct. Ascent now. We climbed. The ascent line took 12 minutes, and none of us spoke for the first 9. Dunmor. Kesk. Don't thank me. I won't. He looked at me for a long time, not with the contempt I had learned to read on him, and not with anything I would call warmth either, something in between, which is where most honest things live. You knew the sentinel would ask for it out loud. I didn't know, I hoped. Hoped which way? Hoped it would make you the one who chose. He did not answer that. He turned back to the rail and watched the green go up past us toward the surface, and I did not thank him because I had said I would not. He had summoned me. He had not looked up when I came in. He was writing his commission report by hand, which was the old way, the way Lord Felon's office required, and his pen moved with the economy of a man who had written a great many of them. Sit, Dunmor. I sat. The sentinel is a rank I have not seen catalogued in 7 years of dives. Yes, Captain. The draw asked for Kesk's consent specifically. It did. Not mine. No, Captain. He kept writing. He did not underline anything or lift his pen or otherwise indicate that the exchange had entered his report. He simply wrote, and I sat, and I watched the shape of his handwriting from the wrong side of the desk. You are dismissed. I stood. On the way to the door I passed behind his chair, and because he had not turned the report over, and because his hand was moving down the page, I read one line at the top of the second column before I was through the doorway. The conscript's utility appears to scale with the crew's proximity to loss. Recommend continued exposure. I did not stop walking. I did not slow. I closed the cabin door behind me the way any conscript closes a captain's door quietly, with both hands, and I stood in the corridor with the iron of the bell ticking around me as it cooled from the dive. Continued exposure. The well in my chest was at 4% and climbing. Brenner was in the mess with a cup Perrick had put in front of him. Jean was in her bunk writing a page she would not show me for another 2 days. And the man who had written continued exposure had, 1 hour ago, ordered Brenner to spend a stroke he could not spare, and would, if I let him, do it again, and would call it tactics, and would file it in the old handwriting Lord Felon's office required. I went to my bunk. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and I listened to the bell tick, and I did the arithmetic Brenner had taught me by hating me, the cost per stroke, the ledger, the exact placement of a captain's ambition against the exact weight of a crew's breath, and I understood, for the first time with a number attached to it, that the next dive was not going to be a dive. It was going to be a choice. Chapter 11. The Sunken Throne. The floodlight caught it all at once, the way a lantern catches a room you have walked into blind basalt. Coral grown into the basalt, the way ivy grows into a ruined wall. Banners the color of nothing hanging from stanchions that had forgotten what stone they were, and a throne. A throne carved out of the seafloor itself, or grown out of it, I could not tell which, and I do not think the difference mattered to whoever had put it there. Behind the throne, at the back of the vault, the shell was cracking. I had heard the sound twice before on the descent and told myself it was the bell's hull adjusting to pressure. It was not the bell's hull. It was ice on a slow river. If the river were older than the kingdom and the ice were 100 tons of something none of us had a name for. Every third breath, another crack. The bioluminescent markings across the shell's face had been bright green when we came into the vault. They were dimmer now. I watched one go dark while I was watching it, and another one darkened on its heel. And I understood without being told that this was a countdown nobody had bothered to write down, because nobody had lived long enough to write it. Sion saw me watching. She did not tell me to stop. She marked the shell's face on her slate and turned her lamp to the throne. Halveth was already there. He had not walked in. He had not risen. He had been there the whole time, I think, and the floodlight had only now agreed to see him. Coral and ghost light. Armor-plated in the pale living stuff that grows on drowned things, and under the armor a shape too large for a man though it wore the shape of one. His eyes were silver, not the silver of a coin. The silver of a fish belly when the boat lights hit it in the dark and it turns and is gone. That silver. The vault went quiet in the way vaults do when the thing inside them has been waiting. On my mark. Ostrich set it low, into the crew line, and nobody moved. He said it again, and Perrick's medical readouts pinged once against my collarbone, well at 19, holding my own barely spent since the Sentinel. Brenner's blade set was down to a third, and standing at parade rest anyway, which I had not seen him do since Pellwick. Sion had closed her logbook. That, more than anything, told me where we were. I'll approach first. He stepped forward. It was a way of walking that said, I am here on authority, and the authority is older than I am, and if you have a problem with me, you have a problem with it. Ostrich stopped 4 paces from the throne. He held up the parchment. The seal caught the floodlight and turned red as an eye. Halveth of the Warden line. By the seal of House Felon, ratified in the Harbor Master's Court at Saltmere on the 9th of the wet month. And by the commission of the Tide-Clergy Council under the 3rd article of the Sunken Succession, I present myself as claimant. Halveth did not answer. I do not know what I had expected. A refusal in words, maybe. A raised weapon. The silence I had imagined the ancient hero using would have been the silence a judge uses when the answer is coming, and the answer is death. This was not that silence. This was the silence of a man in a doorway looking past the caller to see if anyone else is there. It was not aimed at Ostrich. It went through him. Ostrich felt it. I watched him feel it. His shoulders came up half an inch, his weight shifted back onto his heel, and the commission tube dropped a hand's breadth before he corrected. It was the smallest thing. I had never seen him flinch, not on the wire runner's report about the 2 lost B ranks, not when the jaw crab came up under him at Darkfold. Not when the sentinel required witnessed consent and he had to stand there while I asked Brenner for it in front of him. He flinched now. The seal is legitimate. He said it to Halveth. He said it a second time, quieter, and it was not to Halveth anymore. The seal is legitimate. Halveth turned his head. Not toward Ostrich, away from him. It was the gesture a man makes when someone at his door has finished speaking and he is looking for the next person in the line. Ostrich was still there, still holding the parchment, and the parchment was, I have no doubt, valid. I had watched the harbor master stamp it, and the clergy rep witness it, and the wax poured hot from a kettle I could have touched. Halveth turned away from all of it the way you turn away from a receipt. Behind me, Pellwick made a small sound in his throat. It was not a word, it was the sound a medic makes when a patient's numbers do a thing he was not prepared for, and he is filing it for later. Halveth's silver eyes went to Brenner. He did it beautifully. I want to say that. Brenner Kesk had hated me since the seawall at Pellwick, and he had hated me correctly on the mathematics, and I had not liked him for a single hour of the 6 weeks I had known him. He walked forward now with a grace I had not seen in him because he had never had reason to show it to me. The salute was from a book so old the book was probably not printed anymore. His blade set flared once along the edge, a courtesy, a lamp lit in a hallway to say I am who I say I am, and dimmed. Warden, Brenner of Company Saltmere, presenting as claimant by trial by the old way. The old way meant a fight. It meant the claimant swung, and the guardian answered and the survivor took the post. It was in Pellwick's temple songs, the ones he had told me about over cold stew, and it was in the ballads the wire runners sang in the mess when they thought no officer was listening. It was the way the songs said heroes had always been made. Brenner had been born, I think, for the salute he had just performed and had been waiting his whole career to make it. Halveth did not answer. The same silence exactly. Brenner held the salute, and held it, and I watched his knuckles whiten on the hilt, and I watched the blade set edge dim another notch because holding a live blade lit costs. And I watched Halveth look past him the way he had looked past Ostrich, not through him, past him, as if there were a line at the door and Brenner were also not the person Halveth was waiting to see. Brenner lowered the sword. He did not sheath it, he lowered it. He kept his face very still, and I will remember for the rest of my life that he kept his face very still, because a man who has spent a career on the old way and has just been refused by it has earned the right to break something, and he did not. As you say. He said only that. He stepped back. He did not look at me as he passed. He did not need to. Halveth's silver eyes moved. They found me. I want to say I was ready. I was not ready. I was standing at the back of the vault behind Sion, behind Pellwick, with the well readout ticking against my collarbone and the wheel in my chest cold and still because I had not asked it for anything since the Sentinel, and I had been proud of that in a quiet, cowardly way. I had told myself that the 2 men in front of me knew what they were doing, and that my job, my actual job on this dive, was to spin when told and shut up when not. It had been a good plan. It lasted until the moment Halveth looked at Brenner and did not answer. And I understood in the space between one darkening bioluminescent mark and the next that neither of them was going to be answered, and that whatever came next was going to have to come from somewhere else. The floodlight caught the coral on Halveth's armor and made it look, for a second, like the light off a glowing eel in the blind arc of a brack-scale drifter's vision cone. I remembered the eel. I remembered standing in front of Brenner at the first shade with the well ticking down and my hands empty and doing nothing but standing. I remembered Brenner's nod at the sentinel, the single grudging nod that had cost him something none of us had priced yet, and Pellwick saying good without looking up from his cabin bench, and Sion's logbook turning toward me on the ascent line, and the sentence at the top of the page that I now understood had not been a description of my draws, it had been a description of the exam. The shades had been asking a question. Every company that answered by spending itself for its weakest had passed. Every one that panicked and spent selfishly had collapsed on the shade's steady drain. At every gate, someone in our line had put himself between the drain and someone else. It had mostly been me. I saw it, and had been doing it without knowing. The wheel in my chest turned over once, slow, the way a compass needle turns when the ship comes about. Behind Halveth, another mark on the shell went dark. Then two more together. The crack that had been running along the shell's face, all descent lengthened by a hand's breadth while I watched, and something the size of a bell shifted on the far side of it. And the vault took a breath the way rooms take a breath when the door has begun to open. I looked at the well readout on my collarbone. 11%. I looked back at Halveth. His silver eyes had not moved. They had been on me since Brenner stepped back, and they had not blinked if a thing like him could blink, and they were not the eyes of a judge, and they were not the eyes of a king. They were the eyes of a man in a doorway who had finally seen the person he had been waiting for and was not certain yet whether the person had come to relieve him or to fail him. Behind me, 4 people breathed. Sion's breath was steady. Pellwick's was slower than it should have been at this depth, and I knew he was pacing it for the crew. Brenner's was measured through his teeth. Ostrich, I could not hear Ostrich's breath. He was standing very still, and I did not need to turn. The shell cracked again, louder. The floodlight guttered once as the bell above us adjusted for a pressure change none of the gauges had asked for. The wheel in my chest began to spin. Chapter 12, Consent and the Drowned Crown. The tide well read out on the inside of my visor sat at 11%, and the number was not decorative. 11% was the difference between a spin and a corpse. I could feel the well the way you feel a lung that has already given you most of what it has, thin at the edges, gone cold in the middle, and asking, politely, whether you understood what you were about to do. I turned my back on Halveth. I faced my crew. Jeanne had her helmet tipped back a quarter turn, the way she did when she wanted to read a face without a plate between her and it. Pellwick had one glove pressed to Brenner's chest seal, watching a readout only he could interpret. Brenner was upright. That was the thing I noticed. Brenner was gray around the mouth, and his blade set indicator was down to 1 bar, and he was upright. I told them, I think I can pull a drowned crown. It will empty the well, all of it. That means all of you. You will go down, and you will stay down until this is finished, or until I am. I do not know what is on the other side of the pull. I have never drawn above Sentinel. I am telling you what I think, and I am telling you what I do not know, and I am asking. I made myself say the last word without decoration. I need your consent. Jeanne nodded. There was no pause in it, no calculation. She had been writing toward that nod, in her logbook, in the way she stood on the rail beside my hand. In the underlined sentence she had not yet shown me, for 8 chapters of a story I had only just begun to understand was a story. Her head went down once and came up once, and her eyes did not leave mine. Yes. Pellwick was next. He did not look up from Brenner's chest seal. He said the word the way an old medic says it, the way a man says a word he has said before over people he has already lost. Good. Then Brenner. Brenner took a long time. Long enough that the shell above the throne cracked audibly a second time, a sound that came down through the water and into the plates of my armor and into the wet inside of my skull. Long enough that I watched a bead of condensation slide the whole length of his faceplate before he moved. He knew what I was asking. He knew, with a soldier's clean arithmetic, that a nod from him was the one that mattered, because I had stood in front of him at the first shade, and because he had let me spend his stats at the second, and because the wall between us had cracked but had not fallen. And this was the mortar we would either finish laying now or leave open forever. He nodded. Once. Nothing else. 4 out of 4. I did not look at Ostrich. I did not need to. I heard him breathe in, and I heard the small metallic sound of a captain's clasp being adjusted at the throat, which was a thing Ostrich did when he was about to speak on the record. Diver Dunmor. The voice was cold and it was clean, and it was the voice of a man who had built a career on knowing which sentence, said at which second, would keep him inside the law. I forbid this. I heard Sion's breath change. I heard Perrick's glove move once against Brenner's seal, adjusting a pressure he did not want disturbed. I heard Brenner say nothing, which was the loudest thing anyone said. I turned back to Halveth. The warden had not moved. Silver eyes, coral plating, the great trident held not raised and not lowered, waiting. Behind him the shell gave a third crack, longer than the others, and something on the far side of it, something older than the kingdom, older than the throne, older than the songs Perrick had grown up on, leaned its weight forward and tested the seam. I said the line. I said the one thing nobody else at the throne had thought to say, not Ostrich with his seal, not Brenner with his sword. Not the 4 dive companies this season that had come down here with credentials and demands and lord's writs and gone home broken. I am not here to inherit you. I am here to hold your post until someone better comes. The wheel in my chest locked. I felt it in the sternum first, the way you feel a key turn in a lock you did not know you were carrying. Then the draw fired, and I had time, a very small amount of time, to see the reel spin past driftwood, and past deep current, and past abyssal, and keep going, into a band of the wheel I had never seen light up, a band the color of a coin held too long. The status window bloomed across the whole throne floor in letters the size of a man. Behind me, my crew went down. I heard Sion's knees hit the basalt. I heard Perrick's glove slide once along Brenner's chest seal as Perrick himself folded. I heard Brenner, who had quoted blade set costs from memory on the day we met, go down without a word, because a soldier who has given consent does not waste breath on the way down. The tide well dropped through 5, through 4, and stopped at 3. The abyss around me went quiet in a way I did not have a word for. It was the quiet of a room that has been talking to itself for 300 years and has just now been asked a question. Halveth turned his silver eyes on me, and he asked it, "What will you do with my seal?" The voice was the bell from the first 15 seconds of my life down here. It went through the water and through the plates and through my sternum and out the other side. It was not loud. It was the size of the room, and the room was old. I did not hesitate. I had been rehearsing an answer without knowing it since the Merc shelf, since the eel, since Perrick's stew and the word filter and Sion's underlined line. Keep diving for Pellwick, not for Lord Felon. Halveth's pause was enormous. I think I will remember that pause for the rest of my life, the exact grain of it, the way the cracked shell above the throne held its breath along with him, the way Ostrich behind me, I could feel him still standing, still not looking at his fallen crew, held his breath too, though for entirely other reasons. Then Halveth offered a contract. The status window did not bloom for it. It came through the water directly into the wheel, and the wheel translated it into something I could read on the inside of my visor, and what I read was not a power. It was an obligation. I understood, reading it, that the seal holder in that sentence was not Lord Felon, was not Ostrich, was not any court in Pellwick or any commission at Saltmere. The seal holder was the 4 people breathing shallow behind me at well 3%, and the village whose name Halveth had died guarding. And every mouth on every coast that had ever needed a warden and been given, instead, a lord. I signed. I do not know exactly how one signs a contract on the sea floor at well 3% with a hero soul 3 centuries dead. I know the wheel turned once inside my chest, and I know a mark I had not put there went onto the back of my left hand under the plate. And I know Halveth, old Halveth of the drowned village, and the 4 refused kings, bowed his head 1 degree, and then not at all. The trident lowered. Above the throne, the shell knit. I want to be exact about this, because I have thought about it every night since. The cracks did not close the way ice closes over a bad step in a river. They wove. A seam that had been giving for 3 centuries put itself back together stitch by stitch, and the pressure behind it, the older thing, The thing whose weight I had felt lean forward, pulled back into whatever room it had been leaning out of, and did not, for the moment, lean again. The null tide went silent. The abyss went silent, for the first time in 300 years, in the way a bell goes silent between one strike and the next. I was on my knees. I had not felt myself go down. I found my fist pressed to black basalt in the exact posture the very first 15 seconds of my life down here had shown me, and I understood with a clarity that arrived too late to be useful and just in time to be true, that the frame from the cold open had not been prophecy. It had been the wheel showing me, in advance, the shape of the question, so I would know it when it came. Behind me, 4 people were breathing again. I could hear each of them. Sion's breath coming back in through her teeth. Perrick's, professional, cataloging his own vitals first, because that is what a medic does. Brenner's deeper than the others, one long inhale that ended in something that was not quite a laugh and not quite a curse, and did not need to be either. And Ostrich, standing, not looking at any of them. The contract on the back of my hand was warm under the plate. I could not yet read the full weight of it. I would spend years reading the full weight of it. But I knew, kneeling there in the first silence the throne had heard in 3 centuries, that whatever came next, the ascent, the report, the drink Brenner would buy me and not sit across from, none of it would belong to Ostrich. None of it had, from the moment I turned my back. Chapter 13. The report, the drink, and the logbook. We came up into a morning the color of unpolished pewter. The bell's ballast tanks blew with a sound like an animal exhaling after a long hold, and then we were rocking on the swell off Saltmere Quay, the deck slick with the last of the descent condensate, and above us a sky so low and flat it looked like something a joiner had planed down and set on top of the world. Gulls found us before the harbormaster did. They always do. They know the smell of a company that has been under too long. My hands did not want to work. I gripped the rail because I needed the rail to know that I was on it. The depth anchor sat somewhere under my sternum, not painful, only present, the way a coin is present in a closed fist. Behind me I could hear Perrick moving among the crew, doing the small, competent things he did, and I could hear Sion already pulling charts, and I could hear from the aft cabin Ostrich's pen on paper. Ostrich was writing his report. I did not go in. I stood in the passageway a moment with the door not quite shut, and I watched him write. He had Lord Felon's seal already broken and open on the desk beside him, wax the color of dried blood, and he was writing in the fast, neat hand of a man who had rehearsed the sentences during ascent. Commission served, contract secured, Halveth's seal transferred through Company Saltmere under captaincy of Ostrich Vale. Close the door, conscript, or come in either. I came in. You'll be named in the report. I know. Named, not credited, there is a difference, and it matters where the chain gets hung. I am the captain of record, and the company holds the contract. You held the pen a moment for us. That is how it will read. All right. He looked up then, and I saw his face properly for the first time since the throne. Ostrich Vale had gotten what he came for. Lord Felon's political commission, the seal, the standing among the deep companies, whatever ladder he had been climbing since a year I did not know about, he had it. His pen was on the paper that made it official, and his face did not look like a man who had won. It looked like a man who had been handed the exact thing he had asked for and had discovered in the moment of holding it, that the asking was the whole of the pleasure. You forbade nothing down there. You forbade it. I heard you. And you drew anyway. I asked the 4 of them. I noted that. He said it flat. Then he went back to his pen, and I understood I had been dismissed, and I understood something else too, which was that Ostrich Vale would sign 100 more commissions in his life, and none of them would sit any better in his hand than this one did. I closed the door behind me quietly. It was the last kindness I could offer him. Brenner was waiting on the quay when I came down the gangway. He did not say anything. He jerked his chin toward the tavern at the head of the pier, and I followed him, because I did not know what else to do, and because my hands were still not right. And because there are moments in a life when a man you thought hated you does something you cannot read, and you have to walk into the room to find out. He bought 2 drinks at the bar, something clear and hot in short cups. He did not sit across from me at the table by the window. He sat beside me on the same bench so that we were both looking out at the gray harbor and the bell riding the swell out past the breakwater. He set the cup down in front of me, drank his in one pull and did not refill it. He did not speak. I drank mine. It burned. I set the cup down. We sat there like that for perhaps 10 minutes, perhaps 12. A woman behind the bar clattered something. A boy came in with a bucket and went out again. Rain started, iron on the roof, and on the pier, and on the water. Brenner did not look at me, and I did not look at him, and neither of us said one word. And when he finally stood up, he put 2 coins on the table for the drinks, and one hand briefly on my shoulder, not a squeeze, only the weight of it, the way you lay a hand on a rail to know the rail is there, and then he walked out of the tavern into the rain and did not look back. That was the whole of it, and it was enough. A man who had called me a corpse waiting to happen had bought me a drink and sat beside me in silence and put his hand on my shoulder on the way out. He would never say the word. He would never need to. Joan was at the port rail when I came back aboard, her logbook out, but closed against her thigh, waiting. She held it out to me open. I took it because she was offering it, and I looked down at the page, and I saw at the top of it, in her small, precise hand, one line I had not been meant to see before this morning. Read it. I read it. Not random. Never was. Under it, in the same hand, ran columns of numbers I did not know how to read. Angles, ratios, something that looked like a bearing repeated in 3 different notations. A column-headed frame, and a column-headed cost, and a column-headed answer, and in the answer column, a series of small notations, each one a name. Brenner, Pellwick, Scion, Brenner, Scion. And beside each name a tally I could not yet parse. How long have you been keeping this? Since the eel. The eel was nothing. The eel was inside the vision cone. I looked at her. She looked at me. Her face was not warm. Her face had never been warm, and I did not think it would ever be a warm thing in the ordinary sense. But she was looking at me the way she looked at a bearing when the bearing came out true, and I understood that for Sion Ashcroft this was the whole of it. I'll teach you to read it. When? Next dive, and everyone after. She closed the logbook. She slid it into the inside pocket of her coat. Her hand came back out and settled on the rail beside mine, not touching, only there, near enough that the salt on her cuff was on the same rail as the salt on mine. She did not say anything more. She did not need to. The thing between us on that rail was a compact, the certainty that we would dive together again and again after that, and that when we did, she would hold the geometry and I would frame the question, and that the 4 people who had nodded on the throne floor would be the 4 people I dove with until one of us did not come back up. Behind me, in the aft cabin, Ostrich was still writing. He would sign the commission and hand it up the ladder and stand in a room in Felon's Keep and be given a heavier chain than the one he wore. He would look in that room exactly as he had looked in his cabin this morning. I knew it the way I knew the tide. Ostrich Vale had wanted a thing and had gotten it, and the getting had emptied the wanting, and there would be another thing after this, and another after that. And none of them would fill him because none of them were the shape of what he was actually hungry for. I had wanted nothing on the throne floor. I had asked a question of the ones who stood with me, and they had answered, and what came back to me was not a title and not a rank and not a chain. It was an obligation, the depth anchor. I would dive again, regularly, forever. For a village that had never asked me to, and for a man 3 centuries dead who had placed a stone in a basket on the chance that someone someday would draw it and mean it. And the ones who had made that possible were standing on this deck with me in the gray rain, and one of them had her hand on the rail beside mine. That was the shape of it. I did not have the words for it then. I have them now, telling it to you, but I had the shape. She snapped the pocket closed. The small metal sound of the clasp seemed, in that gray morning, louder than anything I had heard all week. And then I saw the priest. He was standing at the foot of the gangway, plain wool robe, undyed, the color of a sheep that has walked through weather. Older than the clergy rep who had drawn my stone at Pellwick, older than any clergy face I had seen since. He was not looking at the bell, and he was not looking at the harbor. He was looking at me. He had a folded paper in his hand. He was waiting for me alone. Chapter 14, The Note in the Vest Pocket. He was standing where the fish carts usually stood, and the fish carts had gone around him rather than ask him to move. That was the first thing I noticed. The second thing was the wool. Undyed, close-woven, the kind of wool the temple songs of Perrick's childhood might have described, and the Tide-Clergy of my own had long since replaced with oiled leather and brass. He was older than any priest I had ever seen at a lottery, and quieter, and he had been waiting for me long enough that the hem of his robe was dark with quay damp. You wanted me. I wanted the man who came back. Walk with me a little, if you can stand. I could stand, barely. The depth anchor sat in my chest where the wheel used to spin, and it had a weight the wheel had never had, not the kind a sword carries, but the kind a promise carries when you have made it out loud in front of people who trusted you. We walked together along the wet stone, and he did not offer his arm, which was a courtesy I only understood later. Castaway's wheel, you know its rank. Flotsam. The board said so, the whole seawall read it. The board said what the board could say. Do you know who placed that stone in the basket? I stopped walking. He did not. Halveth the Warden placed it, 3 centuries ago, before he went south to the coast and died guarding a fishing village. Nobody remembers the name of. He put the stone in the basket himself, and he told the order I belonged to, the order you did not know still existed, and I will not tell you the name of, because names are how orders die, that the stone was to be drawn only when the basket chose to draw it. The basket is wood, it doesn't choose anything. The basket is wood, and yet. We had reached the end of the quay. He turned and looked at me the way Perrick had looked at me over stew the first night, which is to say without appetite and without pity, and with the specific attention of a man who has watched a great many things arrive by sea and be less than what they were rumored to be. You will want to know why he placed it. I will tell you what I was told. Halveth had held a post at the abyss for a long time, and he had come to believe 2 things at once, which is a difficult condition for a man. He had come to believe that the post required a keeper, and he had come to believe that no keeper who wanted the post should ever be given it. I felt the anchor shift against my ribs, the way a cat shifts when it hears its name. So he placed a stone. He put his own draw on it, the last piece of him that was still a man before he went south. And he asked the basket to keep it for 300 years, and to give it, when the basket was ready, to someone who would not know what he was being handed. He was very particular about the not knowing. He said a man who knew what the stone was would spend it on himself before he understood he had it. I spent it on a glowing bait fish. You did, in front of 5 people who watched you do it, and then you did not spin again for the rest of the shelf. That is what he was waiting for, the second spin that did not come. I did not have anything to say to that. The gulls were still arguing. Somewhere behind us, a wire runner was calling out the tide. I have something for you. I put my hand out. He set the paper into it, as though he were setting a coin in a collection plate. No weight of his own on the transfer, all of the weight mine. I read it once, then I read it again, because the first time my eyes had refused the middle sentence. That's the whole thing. All of it. 3 centuries of a stone in a basket, and the whole thing is 4 lines. 4 lines is a great deal to leave a man, if the man reads them slowly enough. I read them slowly. I read cost, everything, and I thought of Sion's hand on the rail beside mine at dawn, and Brenner sitting beside me at the pier tavern without speaking. And Perrick's good offered twice across a cabin table like a small clean stone he had been saving. I read result enough, and I understood for the first time cleanly what the word enough was doing there, a word without victory or reward in it, without inheritance either, enough. The word a man uses when he has finished paying a debt and does not intend to pay it twice. You will dive again. I know. For the village. For whoever needs the diver, and no one else. Then keep the note where you can find it in the dark. There will be nights when you cannot. I folded the paper along the 4 lines that already knew how to be folded. I put it in the inside pocket of my vest, next to the copper coin my father had pressed into my palm at Pellwick, and never asked me to return. The 2 of them sat against my ribs like a pair of small witnesses. The priest inclined his head once, not a bow, an acknowledgement, and turned back toward the quay, and by the time I had turned to say the thing I had thought of saying, he was already past the fish carts, and the fish carts had closed around the place he had been. I took the long way. I did not plan to. The anchor in my chest wanted to walk, and I let it. The seawall path came up around the harbor the way it had come up around it on the morning of the lottery. and I did not realize where I was until I was already there at the low place in the wall where the 7 stones had been drawn, where the clergy rep in his ceremonial glove had held out the basket, where my father's face had done the complicated thing I had not yet, 6 weeks later, learned how to read. There was a child on the rail, 10 years old, maybe less, a coat that had belonged to an older brother or an uncle, folded at the cuffs. The child was looking down at the water the way children look at the sea when they have not yet decided whether it is a thing to love or a thing to be afraid of, which is the only honest way to look at it, and the way most of us forget by the time we are old enough to be given a stone. I did not say anything to the child. I did not have anything to say that would have been the right size for the child's mourning. I walked past, boots leaving salt on the stones, vest pocket warm against my ribs where the paper and the coin sat together, anchor quiet. I did not look back. The bell was where I had left it. The 3 of them were where I had left them, which was not a small thing, because there had been a stretch of yesterday when I had not been sure any of us would be anywhere this morning. Jean saw me first and did not raise a hand, her coat closed over the logbook, her palm already resting on the rail in the place I would put mine when I came aboard. Brenner at the winch did not look up, which was his way of looking up. Perrick coiled his line and did not stop coiling, which was his way of saying good. The captain was not on the deck. I did not ask after him. I understood without being told that Ostrich would file his commission and take his political coin and stand a little further from the rail on every dive after this one, and that this was the shape a man made when he had been shown a door and had chosen the corridor instead. I had watched him not nod. That was information, and I would carry it the way I carried the note without hating him for any of it. The wheel in my chest is still. It is not empty. The 4 people at my back who nodded when there was nothing in it for them, and the one who did not, they were the ones the note was written for, 3 centuries ago in a hand I would never meet. The answer was never mine to keep. It was only ever mine to spend. The sea that morning was the color of a coin somebody had held for a long time before letting it go. If you dove with us this far, stay with the channel. There are more stones in the basket, and the wheel is still waiting to answer.